Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexis Alston. You can find me on social at Lexi the VC, and I'm joined here by our lovely.
Samira Williams at Sacred Soul Practice.
And we are here to talk about all things femininity, all things Black, all things female, all things that fall into that wonderful category umbrella. This is technically the second episode that we've done of this, brought to us by the lovely team at Louvre Health Co. Shout out to Elle and Dylan,
Yeah.
some of my favorite people. Um, and let's do maybe a little bit more formal intro since we have a little extra time. So once again, I'm Alexis Alston. During the day, I'm a venture capitalist. I invest across a few industries, but primarily I invest in underrepresented founders doing really cool things in health tech, artificial intelligence, CPG, and e-commerce. At night, I am a sex tech and health tech enthusiast. I used to run sexual education platforms and programs in my younger years, and it's a topic I get really excited about.
That's beautiful.
So I would love, if you don't mind, we talked about this a little bit backstage, but I feel like it's the topic of the moment, at least in my circles. Let's talk about cuties.
Sure. First, just really quickly, I'm Samira. I am a psychotherapist and a trauma recovery coach. I am a mama and a wife, and I really enjoy supporting women's health and mental health advocacy. And so all of that leads to the conversation around cuties. And I also feel like the current climate, I think that we're in this interesting time where sex trafficking has happened for generations, right? Like that's just the truth. It's more, I feel like, polarizing currently. And I think the bigger conversation lands us with cuties and the over sexualization of girls. I think all girls, but I do think it hits minority communities harder in a lot of ways.
And so tell me a little bit from your perspective, um, why do you think topics like sex trafficking are just now kind of being brought to the forefront of conversations that people are having? Like what's happened? What's happened to bring that to everyone's attention since it's been happening for forever?
For forever. I think, kind of like the drug epidemic, it is hitting the white community hard. And I think when a social issue hits the white community, then it's taken seriously. And so I think because there are young white children and teenage white children who are going missing, and who the numbers can no longer be ignored, we are having to face that it's not just an issue in foreign countries. It's not just an issue in other parts of the world, but it is a significant issue here in the US. And it's also very political. But I feel like, to answer your question, it's hitting the mainstream in a negative way. And so even though it's happened for generations, in the Black community and just at large, um, now we can take it more seriously, quote unquote, because of who it's impacting and at what level it's being impacted at.
Mm. That's really unfortunate. But I mean, I guess I'm glad it's now being brought to everyone's attention. And why do you think that young Black girls especially are just at such a higher risk of not even hypersexualization, just sexualization under the age of 18? What is it about our experiences in this country in particular that have kind of led us into these traps, these really dangerous places?
And I think you said it. I think you said it correctly the first time. I think it is hypersexualization, and so I feel like this across the board for all children. I think our society has become hypersexualized just across the board. I feel like that's one element. I feel like for Black girls and Black women, I think that we are taught to be desensitized to sexual trauma. I think that we are taught to normalize um, sexual acts and trauma and even just sexualization of children. You mentioned age 10, and I wish that were true, but I really feel like for Black women, for minority women, women are girls, babies really are um, are groomed to be okay with their bodies being sexualized. I think it happens in families. I think it happens in schools. I think it happens in society. I think it happens in family units. I think that for a long time, we have allowed children to really be involved in adult things. And so I grew up in the South, and most of the time, unless you lived maybe like 5 minutes from school, you took the bus or your parents took you or a neighbor or somebody. When I moved to Philadelphia about 18 years ago, I would see all of these like little children walking themselves to school. I'm like, what is happening? These kids are babies. And I get that it's a different social dynamic, but I think that these are all ways that children are really adultified. I think they are parentified in a lot of ways. And because they are seen as quote unquote adults, it allows society, people to see them as adults. And what do adults do? They have sex, they have consensual sexual relations. But when we're looking through that paradigm, then we're able to normalize this inappropriate behavior. I think that a lot of Black children feel like they had sex at a very early age, when in fact it was not sex, it was trauma, it was rape, it wasn't consensual. And I think that we have a whole paradigm around that. And I think that if we really get honest, it impacts boys and girls really of all races. But I feel like Black people are not always, and brown people are not always looked at as going through a life cycle from children, babies to children to adolescents to young adults to adults. I feel like you're a kid or you're an adult when you're a person of color, and that's that. But as we all know, it's not as clear cut as that.
Absolutely. Well, let's do a quick pause on that. We'll get right back to it, but let's do a quick intro to our friend who's joined us below.
Hello. So you want me to introduce myself?
Yes, please.
I am Q Kinnebrew. I am the craft goddess. I was invited to this by Elle, and I am here to give my opinion and my expertise as a Black woman.
So, Q, just to bring you up to speed, the topic of the day is about the hypersexualization of Black women, but Black youth in particular, and how that starts at a very young age for us. And we're going to eventually kind of wrap this into the discussion about cuties and, kind of see where the conversation takes us. And to build upon what you were saying, Samaria, it's, there's studies that have been done about the fact that in the school setting in particular, Black girls are seen as more mature than their white or male counterparts. And therefore, in that setting, it's why Black girls are more likely to have disciplinary infractions than other people, because teachers perceive them as being older, more mature. Therefore, they have higher expectations of them than their peers. Oh, she just disappeared. Oh, no. Oh, no.
Hopefully she'll be back in just a second. She'll be back.
But yeah, I mean, the data shows that that's true. That's true clearly in the classroom. You're expressing that it's clearly happening in the home, and I don't know, like, where did it start? I mean, I have my theory is that it started with slavery and Black women and Black girls and children being seen as commodities to be used and abused in various ways, and that's just carried on for hundreds of years.
I agree. It's so true. There's a work, and I forget the author's name, but if you look up the book, it'll share. It's called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome, and she really talks about this mentality of slave patterns being passed down through society, and accepted as forms of behavior that were abnormal, that were abusive, that was psychological warfare, that have been passed down and normalized. And you are 100% right with the sexualization, with the rape culture. And really, what you hit on is this idea of women and children being property, and men. With slavery, human beings were bought and sold and stolen and trafficked for their labor. But I think it even is larger than that. I feel like, as we know, in the women's rights movement, um, that in some ways, had a negative impact on Black and Brown communities. But that movement was about women no longer tolerating being seen and valued as property. But that mentality, in so many ways, has still been passed down across cultures, across ethnicities, across generations. Have we made progress? Obviously, absolutely. Do we still have a long way to go? Absolutely. And if you look in this country, animals had legal rights in this country before children did. The child abuse laws were passed after animal rights. And so when you look at that, it's like children weren't seen as people. They were seen as basically workers for the family and could be treated any kind of way and abused, and tortured, really. And there was no law that made that an outlaw, or criminal offense. And so if you think about what we're seeing in our country right now, we have these abnormal pathologies being passed down through generations. There are people who really believe in racism, in sexism, in homophobia, in the fact that children are not adults and they don't have any rights. There are people who believe these ridiculous paradigms, and they spread this atrocity. But when we think about a mindset and a perspective, a belief is something that we keep thinking that we believe is true. That's it. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. It doesn't have to be even founded in actual facts or truth. It's just a belief. And so I think when we, as we mentioned earlier, when we think that minority children are fully developed at 5, 6, 7 years old in their mind and their thinking and their ability to say no and their ability to make decisions, then we're going to treat them like adults who have that right. But what we know neurobiologically is that the prefrontal cortex, where we make decisions and have proper thinking around right and wrong, isn't developed until really 25 to 30. So when you think about just the fact of that, when we look at children across the board, when we look at something like cuties, like sex trafficking, and people say, you shouldn't be hanging out with people that you don't know, and you shouldn't dress this way, and you shouldn't be doing these kinds of things if you don't want bad things to happen, we are playing into the hand that says women and children bring this on themselves, or it can't just be something that happens, so somehow women must be doing something wrong, they must be parenting wrong or doing something wrong. That only happens in dysfunctional families, when we know for sure that is not the truth.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk a little bit more about the bit that it's somehow the girl or the woman's fault, right? Like, for me, I think I've said this last time, for me, that started in the schools. We had really horrible dress codes where the men's dress code or the boys' dress code was something like, don't wear things with profanity, don't wear things with guns on it. And like that was it. And then the girls' list, but then what we couldn't wear was a laundry list of, skirts had to be this length, shorts had to be this length, shoulders, cleavage, this whole gamut, that it was somehow my responsibility to not hold a boy's attention and
Yes.
to help him be focused. That has nothing to do with me.
Yes. You
But we're
will,
taught by, like kindergarten, when you have to think about what you're wearing when you go to school every day, that it's somehow our responsibility and therefore our fault when it goes wrong.
and parents perpetuate that because they're trying to keep their children out of trouble. They're trying to not cause any problems. So they're trying to buy all the right things and check your skirt length and your spaghetti straps and bop, bop, bop. They're trying to help girls stay in line versus challenging the system that's perpetuating these ideologies that are archaic and really put the onus on women and no responsibility on men for their actions and for their own ways of being parented to respect a woman and her body, just because.
Mm-hmm. Q, what do you
Yes,
think?
because one of my things is when you said the laundry list of things that girls are have to check off on their list. My thing is I didn't have boobs in school, but I had thighs and I had a big butt. And, even when I had the skirt that came to my fingertips, I was still somehow in trouble because it was like, it's like, okay, the dress code is shorts, fingertips, skirt fingertips. It's not my fault that I am more curvier than other girls. And it seems as though that I'm doing more. We have the exact same outfit on. It's just I have more curves than her. And it's like, if your body is more curvy, you're policed more. And I just think, when it comes to our swimsuits, and you don't think like it makes you self conscious of your body and who you are in your space early on. And you're always thinking, should I wear this? Is this, not, oh, be responsible for your eyes, be responsible for not being tempted and wanting to touch or whatever. It's always the girl that has to take on that responsibility, even when it's not really her fault. Because my jeans are my jeans.
Right. It's a beautiful point. It's a beautiful point. And it speaks to a bigger conversation around how we have healthier conversations around body, around having a sense of agency. How do we help young people navigate hormones and consent and respect and being accountable and taking personal responsibility for our own actions, for our own thoughts, for our own ability to self-regulate. These things are not taught usually in public schools, and they should be.
They definitely should be. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I don't think we were taught any of that when I was in school. I remember the first time I heard the word consent was in college.
I was thinking the same thing. We had sex ed. I'm in my 30s, and I don't remember there being any conversation around consent. Consent, really, in terms of anything,
Mm-hmm.
of dating, of going somewhere, of sexual interactions, or even in a platonic way, because we did hit on some relationship kind of boundaries in that class. It was very general, but even with that, there was no talk of like what is consent, how does it apply to different areas of life, in this setting, in school, with friends, with people that you're dating. That was never a conversation.
Yes, like when you bring up sex ed, I think the education process of it is extremely half baked because they teach you these are your sex organs, this is what they do, but no one talks about the responsibility of no means no. When do you not put that pressure on a person to be sexually active with you? Is it a mutual, decision, not you're being pressured into and you eventually give in because you're like, I don't want to disappoint the person. Like it's extremely half baked when it comes to it. It's like, okay, they tell us about STDs, they tell us about how to wear protection, they tell you something about what is that? What is it? Birth
Pregnancy.
control. That's what yes, they tell you about birth control, they tell you about condoms, they tell you about STDs, and that is the extent of the education that you get on sex. There are so many other convoluted things. Like, when do you want to do it? When should you say no? About permission, how far do you go with somebody? kissing? Is it, do you initiate? Like, it's so many things that it doesn't touch on, that I think it's the worst part of sex ed, because it gives you literally the surface level of the education, and it's left you with, okay, so make sure you take your birth control, you wear a condom, and don't have a baby. And it's so much more than just whether or not you have a kid from it.
It's so much
Mm-hmm.
more than that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I used to teach sex ed when I was in college. I was running a program that taught sex ed throughout Providence public schools, not all of them, but a good chunk of them. And we had so much pushback at the principal level for our curriculum because it started with all of the biological things and, moved to the scientific things. But the last few months of every curriculum, because it was a year long, were about empowerment, consent, pleasure, erogenous zones, relationships, cultural relevancies, and what that means for every different person, and how, the way relationships work in one culture might be different in another. We taught so much more beyond the biology, and we always got pushback saying, well, why don't you just stop at the biology stuff? All of these other lessons, why bother? That's not science. And it's like, well, it's sociology
Yeah.
and it's psychology, which is science, but more importantly, this is what it's about, right? Like, sex isn't just about organs going in other organs between two or more people. There's things that happen before and after that involve human interaction, and we need to talk about those things. And I don't know how you expect people to have healthy relationships if you're not walking people through what does health look like from a mental and psychological standpoint when you're talking about more than one person. Like, it was wild, but we had a couple of schools that were really excited about it, and we hopefully, helped a lot of kids grow up to be well balanced adults in their sex lives. But it was insane how hard it was to get it across to adults that these were important topics.
I totally agree with you. I also feel like you hit on a really important conversation. I think that when you take the science piece and put it in one hand, and then you take the emotional, intelligent piece and put it in the other, I feel like we don't talk about it and we don't value it, because I think that many schools understand our culture and this society, and they realize if you start talking about those deeper conversations, it very well could happen that children begin to talk about what's happening at home. And I think they don't want that. And I honestly think that, we talk about the pandemic of COVID, and yes, it's very serious and very, unfortunate that we're having the situation. But if you look at, I think, child sexual abuse and just abuse in the home in general, it's been a pandemic for generations also, and it feeds into this hypersexualization of women, of children, of Black and Brown children. If we're talking about the trafficking, I remember being a young adult, maybe 19 or 20, and there was some HBO special on about this rapid child missing situation in Atlanta, maybe 20 years ago or something. And they were all Black children. And they thought that there was a serial killer or something on the loose.
I remember that they were killing
Yeah,
Black boys. I remember that
it
it
was
was,
bad.
and it hardly got any national recognition or anything. I remember that story,
I
and they
think that
start
was
telling like the boogeyman, like, if you go to the store at the dark, they're gonna snatch you up. But no one really spoke about it. Like,
I think
someone's
that may have
dismantling and disfiguring these kids.
I think that may have been separate, because this was boys and girls, and they were just going normal.
Oh,
I think what you're talking about was separate, because I do remember that now. What I'm talking about was there were children just missing. They were leaving for school, not coming home. They weren't making the news. There was no, like, they vanished. And what is coming out now is there were many children becoming missing in the South, like the Bible Belt area, and it's believed to have been trafficking. But because the stories weren't covered, there were no real missing persons investigations happening. but my point in sharing that is to say that when we talk about how we over sexualize and how we normalize trauma that happens to Black and Brown people, in some ways we become immune to it, we become numb to it. And I think that because we don't really want to look at it, it's taken this level of chaos and dysfunction and violence for everyone to say this is out of control. But when we talk about the hypersexualization, it's like I believe that we don't want to call a thing, and we don't really make progress in something until we call a thing.
So I'm going to take a brief moment. This is my friend Vaughn. We are actually sitting here listening to this together, and she has the input. But I did ask Ale, actually, that's what I was messaging to ask her if she could speak. So she may jump in from time to time.
Please do. Please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't. So, hi, everybody. Okay. So, the only thing that I really wanted to add was I really heard our conversations. I really think it's really good. The only thing that I wanted to add as a mom, as a single mom to a Black male who was 14 and going into his own sexuality at some point very soon, his own puberty and things like that, I think I just would like to add that it starts at home. I really am very, 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 very open with him about his body, his anatomy. Very open with him about body autonomy. Very open with him about consent, what it looks like, that he has the choice to say no as well, and that females can be over sexualized because of their past traumas and what it looks like. I also teach him about porn, and I know his favorite porn genre and this and that, and I have to teach him and tell him. And people, I get backlash a lot, like, why do you know your son's favorite porn genre? I know it because I want him to know that this is a fantasy world. They're selling him something. This is not how women are always going to behave during intercourse or during the stages to get to intercourse, or what pain could look like. This might be painful for one person, it might be enjoyable for another person. And in those conversations for me, and this is really starts at home, I don't shy away from the taboo conversation. I don't shy away from involving my friends. He calls Q Auntie Q. And I need him to have those conversations. If you don't want to have them with me, Auntie Q is here. If you don't want to have them with me, someone else is here to talk. Another man is here to talk to you about this. But I don't want those to be shut down in my village, because I do believe the village raised a child. But if you're going to shut down when he has questions, or he has he's not thinking like an adult yet. But I need him to think that as a woman that you're dealing with, or if you turn out to be LGBTQ, the man that you're dealing with, they have their own body autonomy to say, this is yes, this is no, this is. You have to give that person that, and stop thinking that women are, I'm just your mama. I'm your mama, and I'm a sexual human because that's how you got here. I'm your mama, and Q is your aunt, but she has a baby, and guess what? She had to say yes or no. She had to say, this is what I like, or this is what I don't like. This is what I want to move forward with. You might meet a woman who don't want to move forward with you. That's okay. You might be chunkier to one girl, and another girl might say you're not chunky enough. Whatever that looks like for them, you have to have your own self-love, just like you can see someone else's self-love. And you have to appreciate their own self-love, whatever that looks like for them. You don't have to deal with it. You can move on to find somebody that agrees with your stance, or wherever you are on the spectrum of anything. That's all. Sorry.
No, beautiful. It's such an empowering.
No, don't apologize. Yeah, that's great. A great perspective.
We need it. I think we would have less of this over exploitation, and really we would be able to talk about trafficking and just dangers if we could have a more open conversation with our children. Because I agree with you 5,000%, but it starts at home. We can't expect school care of every situation when it comes to raising a child. And you bring up a beautiful point that it requires a village for kids, it requires a village for adults, it requires a village for people, whether you have children or not. We need a community. And I think because we don't have as much community is why we have so much chaos. Because, like you said, sometimes it's hard to have conversations with that person, whether it's, the parent or the person that's causing harm, or if a child is scared about something. When you have these children infiltrating schools, trying to get kids into trafficking, it's like, it makes you think, like, do you know who your kids are hanging out with? I know they're older, but I feel like that communication, like you're saying, starts earlier on. So if a kid feels like, I met somebody, they're new, they just appeared, the parent can get a little more involved in that situation. I'm not, of course, blaming parents, but I am saying that we're in a new day and age, and we cannot not have conversations, like you're saying, because they may be uncomfortable. I think that is
right
to the problem, not having conversations about the hard stuff, because kids are going to find answers somewhere, or they're going to be exposed to things and have no outlet to talk about what feels wrong or what feels right, or I'm just not sure. I think dialogue is so very important.
What tips would you have for other parents who may have children who are approaching their teen years? What advice do you have for them to encourage them to have these conversations with their kids, even though they may be tough? Like, what would you say?
This is my opinion. I don't feel it's tough. I don't feel nothing is tough or off limits. That's just how I feel. I feel like that because I don't want, my son's name is Torian, and he's about to be 15 Valentine's Day. I don't want it can be considered tough because I want him to get the information here first. And if I don't know the right answer, I'm going to go look for it. And not only am I going to look for it, but I don't want him to consider, you know how if you're in class and you say, I don't know how to do fractions, you're telling yourself you don't know how to do fractions. You're not getting it. The math teacher is speaking Spanglish to you. But somebody else might raise their hand and they might get it. And then somebody else over here, they don't get it with you, but nobody's saying nothing until the person that raised their hand said something. You get what I'm saying? And had to be uncomfortable and say, listen, I don't understand it. You need to. So for me, that's how I feel. I don't want him to be like, you know what? I don't know what consent is. Or mama, she told me that I can't touch her dress. Or I don't want the conversation because I want you to be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable causes growth.
Yes.
I need you to grow. I need you to understand that she didn't want you to touch her dress. You don't need to touch her dress. Don't touch her dress. Just like my son has dreadlocks. That person doesn't need to touch your dreadlocks. If you say no, that means no. This is what consent is. This is what body autonomy is. This is what fetishes are. I even go down to that because I'm raising a black boy and I have to teach him what fetishes are because to me, white women who date black men, that's another topic, sometimes are fetishizing them. And I have to show him and be like, listen, she used X amount of phrases and he might be a fetish for her. Like that's not right. You get what I'm saying? Yes. I don't consider them tough because I want him to see the signs to say, you know what, I'm not with this or I am with this. I don't consider them tough because it's just like I don't want nobody else's kids to go through that. I don't want nobody else's kids to be molested and be like, I didn't tell you because I thought he was gonna kill you. Don't worry about me being killed. Okay? Don't worry about that. I handle that tough stuff. Yeah. I want you to just talk to me. I want them communication lines to be open. I don't care if it's about math. I don't care if it's about science. And I definitely don't care if it's about your body. Like, I just don't. So, but it also helps, once again, that I do have a village. If you don't want to talk to me, if you scared that you telling me so-and-so touched you and you didn't like it and that they gonna kill me, go tell RTQ. Maybe she can talk to me better. Or just like as if just like back to the classroom situation, maybe you don't understand fractions. Maybe Auntie Q does. You need to talk to somebody though. And I tell my village, don't shut him down. Don't shut him down about nothing. If he call you about a science project, help him. If you can't help him, find somebody that can help him. Maybe it's not my thing, but Why would I let something be tough when you can just let me find out. Let me find out the right answer. Let me figure it out. Let me see a different point of view. Let's talk. Let's call so and so. Because I don't want you going out to that world because that's not how the world is not black and white. It's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
So
a beautiful point too. It's like for some people, addressing what you're addressing may feel hard for them, but I love what you're saying about having the conversation anyway, because sometimes getting out of bed, going to work can feel hard. We still got to do it. Sometimes raising kids feels hard. We still got to do it. You don't want to go to the grocery store, but you still got to go to the grocery store if you want to have food in the house. It's like we can do hard things, but not talking about it, I think, is what is also perpetuating the cycle that you talk about. I feel like you are so brave. I think it's hard to raise girls in this world. I think it is harder to raise men because you have to have the harder conversations and you have to realize that you are raising a man. You're not raising a boy. You are raising a
and I can't pacify him. I even tell like when I say we're open enough to, like I said, he's my only child. I even still say, I'm going on a date. You going on a date? Yes. I'm still a woman. Like I still have to have those conversations because I need him to know you gonna date a woman one time, and at some point that woman might be a mom.
Yeah.
I can't pacify you on that, on how to do X, Y, Z. I can't. I gotta be open with you and tell you everything that I know. This is how to budget. This is how to go grocery shopping. I can't just stop at, pick up the can of corn. No, I can't do that. It's not fair to reality. And reality is stuff happens.
You hit the nail on the head. We are talking about reality. And I think when we're not talking about reality, we're doing a disservice to children, to the community, because the conversation that began really around the Me Too movement was you can't really protect the safety of women if we don't invest in the health and well-being of men, because anyone can perpetrate abuse. Like that's men, women, whoever can abuse someone else. However, most crimes against women when it comes to sexual violence happen with men. And the reality is we have to talk just what you're saying around how to prevent it. I think conversations talking about health and well-being and consent and boundaries, and really I love what you said about you're preparing him for the harder conversations. You're helping him manage his own ego, because I think so much of violence comes down to power and ego. But if we don't have those conversations, we can't navigate it, right? And I think it's also the same conversation that you're having about your son. So many parents need to take note of and have with their daughters, because you don't want to mess with men who don't have that standard and who aren't treating you in an empowered way. We need to cut things off. We have heard all this year about, men killing women and all of these things. And it's like, it's terrible and you don't want to hear about it. But at some point, you also want to say, the first time he hits you, leave. The first time he threatens your life, leave. Like, there's no second chances. You need help, but I can't help you. You know what I mean? It's like, I think sometimes we allow toxic patterns to go on, and I am in no way victim shaming. But if you keep walking down the same street and you fall in the hole every time, you have to pick a different street, or you have to go around that hole. You can't keep walking into that same hole every time and blaming the hole. It's not the hole's fault. You need to pick a different path. And I think
the path walking goes back to what was described earlier about building the village.
Yes.
It's so much easier to walk down the other path when you have friends and family on 5 other paths to guide you along the way. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we make sure that we could create these ecosystems within our families and friends and communities where people feel safe to do that? Right? A big problem with victims of abuse is they've become isolated from their community, and it's strategic by the abuser. It's not an accident at all. That they do things to remove you, right? They may move you across the country or say, don't call her. We don't have to go to that birthday party. We don't have to see your aunts anymore. Don't hang out with your cousins. They're trash. They're removing you from that community and that village that is so integral to your success and your growth as a human and your safety, really.
Beautiful.
And then go back on, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No.
To go back on the issue about reality and to bring in cuties, one of the things that I realized because I did watch it, so many people would prefer to turn off the light. That's what I call it when there is a reality that you don't want to face.
Yes.
And they're like, cuties was horrible. It was sexualization of children. And I'm just like, so you missed all of the other points, the eating disorder, you missed the bullying, you missed the sexualization from your phones, because that was the whole reason why she made the dance routine, because she thought getting through the internet, and their young minds, as you said earlier, receiving all of these messages, they are not adults. She didn't realize that you made a highly sexual dance routine because you were unsupervised, having a cell phone, not realizing what it is that you're consuming. And so all of these parents are on Facebook, Cuties was horrible, I'm canceling Netflix, da 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 da. And I'm just like, so you didn't think to go ask your kid what's on their phone? Because
That's
I definitely thought of, I definitely thought about that. And it's just like, you rather turn off the light and believe that Netflix, this genre, even though it's a French movie, it's the first time that there has been, hypersexualization of children. So when y'all was watching, what is that dance show with the moms?
dance.
Y'all didn't think, y'all didn't see that. Y'all didn't think of that. It's just, there are so many times that things are in our face that you'll prefer to turn off the light so you don't have to deal with it. So you don't know if your kid is being bullied. You don't know if somebody's groping your child. You don't know if they're, late night looking at porn and getting misconstrued information about body autonomy, because you thinking, oh, this is what you're supposed to do when you have sex. And I'm just like, so we're not going to have these conversations. We're just going to turn off the light. Mm-mm. And we're going to cancel Netflix because Netflix is the problem.
Okay. See,
but I will say though, as much as I agree with what you're saying about cuties, like the mission and the movie was debuted for the purpose of talking about these issues of hypersexualization of young girls. I will say though that I wish that the film was filmed with older actors. I wish that some of the dancing scenes weren't filmed with angles at the pelvis, because although I understand as what I would consider a normal, fully functioning adult what the intent of the film was, I do also understand concerns that that kind of content, alongside dance moms and and baby pageants, toddlers and tiaras, and all of those other really horrible things, unfortunately become fuel for problematic groups in the internet and on the world, right? Like, the intention was great, and I really do. I'm glad that there's a new platform for that movie to be shown. I just wish that we did it a little differently, right? Like, I would have hired 18-year-olds who just looked really young to play those roles in the movie. I think about how would I feel if I were those actors in the conversations that are happening around their bodies right now on the internet. Right? I don't want to see children in that position, even though it's, to talk about how bad hypersexualization is. I wish we didn't use children to make that message.
But I feel like it's real. Kids, it may, in order for us to see it, to have a conversation piece, it needs to be a movie. But the reality is these things are legitimately happening and with children in that age group. Like, I have several friends who are social workers, and her main thing is social worker with children that are on basically, in order for you to see her, you have to go through the courts. And it's about drug rehab and all of that. She has an 8-year-old heroin addict. Like, these are issues that are facing the children. So I do understand about the psychological of, in order for the conversation to be had, or in order for the media to be displayed, you do have to use an untainted, so to say, 11-year-old. But there are 11-year-olds that are already experiencing this, and not talking about it or not using them as puppets to get this message. I get it, but it's needed.
And I think you're both right. I think they're both true perspectives. I think that we can do it differently, even with having table talks like this. I think you could have talks with children, where it's not so much of a visual effect, but just having the conversations with adults that can navigate that conversation. Maybe not parents, but people that they can trust to move the conversation along. But I also feel like both you and your friend made beautiful points around we have to face the reality of what is happening if we're going to bring change to it. If we keep the lights turned off, what's happening is only going to get worse. I 100% hear that. And I also hear you, Lexi, around the conversation around how can we bring some safety to these conversations? How can we bring some, I know this is what's happening, but it shouldn't be happening. And so, how can we move forward in a way that is trauma informed, that is bringing in emotional safety and really cultivating emotional intelligence? I think that's part of the missing piece of it. It's like there are two sides of the spectrum. Either people who say keep the lights off and let's not look at it, or let's whitewash it so much that we aren't really talking about actual problems. I feel like there's certainly a middle ground that we can find.
Absolutely. And one example, I'm going to steal this example from a YouTuber named D'Angelo Wallace. He said, when you think about thought provoking content, we saw, the book Push be turned into Precious, the film. And Gabrielle Sidibe was in her 20s when she was in that role. She was playing a teenager who was going through trauma and experiencing really difficult things, but it was played by an adult woman who was able to consent to being in that role.
Yeah.
Right. That's the biggest part of Cuties to me that I'm missing is, well, you just did that to a bunch of children who don't even really have the ability to consent to be in this film because it's their parents who make those decisions for them. And I just wish I had seen it from older people who played the roles, or even if it was a documentary talking about their experiences and less seeing the dancing, or an animated role. I just don't want to see people have to be put in that position to get the message across. We can do it in other constructive ways. And kudos to the director for starting these conversations. I just would have made really that big tweak. Same thing with toddlers and tiaras. I think it's garbage. I don't believe in child pageants. I don't believe in the hyper-sexualized dance troupes, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's also because of where I'm from. When I think of like children dancing, I'm thinking of like ballet and jazz and tap, not, some of the dancing that you would see on Dance Mom for some of these other shows. I just need to also, or thinking about, let's have these conversations, but also we got to protect the children that we're having these conversations about.
That's the truth. I think that we as women also have to stand up and say, it's not like, I know what has happened up until this point, but there does come a point where we have to say in our own lives and also collectively, this may be the way things were done, but it's not okay. Like, this should not keep happening. We see this in families where generational dysfunction happened, and then somebody stands up and says, no, I'm not going to continue to remain silent about this. I'm not going to continue participating in family functions where, this is happening, or this person's there. We can't keep ignoring the elephant in the room. I feel like we're there collectively too, because I hear you, Lexi, around we can have the conversation without perpetuating the same problematic pattern. But I also hear you too when you talk about we have to address what is happening, like in reality. And I think that we can do that, but still have safety involved. And I think that we can do it without perpetuating the same violence that we're trying to bring to an end, or at least bring more awareness around, in terms of how we go forward in a more healing way.
Can I add that starts at home as well?
Yes.
So my son, like I said, we talk about everything. We sorry y'all, I'm trying to get my key off my thing. So during the summertime, I make him do essays, and essays could be on different things. I want an essay on the color blue. So this past summer, his essay was the top 5 mental illnesses:
Mm.
schizophrenia, bipolar, blah, this, and so on. And so in the essay, he had to tell me in his own words what those meant to him. You know how he's registering what they're saying the definition is, and who he thinks that he knows with each
Yes.
mental disorder. And so, and he in talking to him, he thinks that my mom is bipolar, and he thinks just other different things. But now, because that was, like I said, this past summer, now he's saying to himself when he sees other kids, he talks and he goes, I think they suffer from trauma. They're a little toxic. And he was dating some girl who he liked, who didn't like him. And he started talking to her friend. And then she comes back and says, Torian, I like you. Don't talk to my friend. And he was like, well, that seems a little toxic. And she's like, what? What is toxic? And I'm like, Torian, you have to realize you talking to other people your age, they might not know this. But the fact that now at your age, you can see and recognize your own to be like, I'm not willing to deal with this, or your own circle to say, this person may have some traumas that's undiagnosed, or
Giving him the ability to call a thing a thing.
yeah, giving him the ability to call a thing, like you said. So I think that was also another time of it's starting at home. You don't know generational curses if you can't see generational curses.
Come on now.
I had to tell him, I had you at 20. My mom had me at 22. Her mom had her at 21. It might be a generational curse thing, however you look at it. So I think, once again, those uneasy conversations. My mom might be a little bit polar. Her mom was definitely bipolar, which means you looking at me now and I might be a little bit bipolar with my mom. It might be a generational curse thing. It might not. Listen, I don't know. But however, we can call a thing in this house, and you can see it in someone else. So if somebody else is not having those conversations with their own children, then it's like you make me somebody who's my son who's going to be just looking at you like, yeah, no, because you're not ready to call a thing, and I don't want to deal with that, or I do want to deal with that, or it's not as bad, or whatever the case may be. But you have to be having those awkward conversations within your village, because I tell him easily I don't have them all up here. I'm a little off. That's my business though. I'm handling it. I'm going to therapy.
Right.
And that's awkward in itself, but it has to be done.
And it has to be said and talked about. I love that conversation. And what I love that you mentioned earlier about this conversation is that just what you're saying, children need villages, yes, but adults do too. I feel like you brought up such a beautiful point tonight around if these conversations are hard for you, seek out support. It could be a friend, it could be professional support, it could be a coach, but definitely don't keep ignoring it because the conversation is hard for you to have with yourself, with your children, with the children that you are around. Even if you feel like you are perpetuating these cycles in some way, there is support, there is help, there are ways to get support. To do something differently. And so I love that you're saying the conversation does start at home, but we may not have all the answers. Oftentimes we don't. We have doctors, we have, teachers, pastors, we have specialists that we go see to get specialized support. This is no different. I love that you are so empowered around it and your son is so blessed to have you and your village. But I want to encourage those of us who are not as empowered at this point to have these conversations, get support. If you don't understand your kids' homework, you're going to seek out support to get them the help that they need. This is the same conversation. And I really believe that we are perpetuating the cycle by, as Q mentioned, keeping the light turned off and saying, I'm scared. You can be scared and you can turn the light on and get the support that you need to talk about whatever is in the light. I love what you talked about around the conversations may not be easy, but once once we begin to have them, they also may not be as hard as we're making them out to be in our mind. It might just feel that way. And feelings can't control us. We have to be the adults in our life, and we have to protect our children. And I think part of that is for sure having the harder conversations and bringing in support. I love that you're talking about how you have a village for yourself, for him, and for your family unit. I think that we all need that. I think teachers need that. I think that providers need that. I think that people who, if you deal with people on any level, you need some kind of a village. And if you don't have one, I hope this conversation sparks the seed of how can I make this easier for myself? I may not naturally be good at this. How can I get some support so I'm not the one on the news, or I'm not the one whose kid has gone and done this thing because we didn't talk about it at home? I think, and if we are talking about it at home and it's not working, now what needs to happen? Do we need to go to therapy? Do we need to get a coach? Do we need to get somebody else involved that can help us? If you're trying to fix your sink and the sink's not working, you call a plumber. You don't just say, well, my sink is broke, can't use my sink. You come
Or
over.
put a bucket under there.
The sink is broken, can't use that sink. 2 years has passed by now. We can't do that when it comes to our children. And also, I feel like our own mental health, because I do think for sure, if you have unaddressed trauma, it's hard to hold space for somebody else's experience. And I think that we have to really own that and get the support that we need so that we can have the conversations. If you don't ever want to talk about sex in any way with your kids, that's a red flag. Like that's the light that we can't leave turned off. And if you feel uncomfortable about something that's happening with your children, what they're watching, their cell phone time, this pandemic, whatever it is, we can't just ignore it and wish it away. We can't just wish things away and hope that it goes away. That's not a strategy. And so I love what you talk about, really addressing whatever it is with your son. And I think that if we could take that away from this conversation, even around sexualization of children, I think if we are seeing it in our circle of influence, we have the power to do something about that. And it could be as simple as having a conversation. It could be reaching out to that child if it's appropriate in your circle and say, hey, if you feel some kind of way about something, you can reach out to me and we can talk about it. I think that we want like huge, big umbrella kind of answers when sometimes the answers are very simple. It's communication, it's dialogue, it's having the conversation, it's investing in a village, building a village, starting where you are with whatever you have, and realizing doing nothing is not the answer.
I agree. Completely.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great place actually for us to wrap up today's session. Communication is the answer. We have to continue to talk about things. I think all of you said it incredibly eloquently. Any last closing thoughts before we take it out? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again. This has been the Love Table Talk series and brought to you by Love Health Co., Louvre Health Co. I'm so sorry. I'm tired. And Elle Hoffman and Dylan's great company. And we will see you all very soon.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for being here, ladies.